Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today I'm talking with Darlene Williams, who is the founder and the executive director of the Stroke Comeback Center. Thank you so much for being here, Darlene.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I was intrigued. You came to my Rotary Club. You presented to my Rotary Club about the Stroke Comeback Center. I had heard about the center for years, but didn't really know much about it. So your presentation was fascinating. So I want our viewers to understand how you came to found the Stroke Comeback Center.
Yeah, good question. By training, I'm a speech-language pathologist, and my primary area of interest is stroke and the consequences of stroke, obviously the speech consequences of stroke. And I worked most of my career in acute care hospitals. So when you're in a hospital, in rehab, inpatient, outpatient, your services are covered by insurance. And so the length of the service that you're able to deliver is proportionally determined by your insurance coverage. So every single day, I would have to say to a family, you know, I'm going to have to stop seeing you next week or 2 weeks down the road because insurance has informed me that they're no longer going to cover your services. And the first question out of everyone's mouth was always, well, now what do we do? And so I like to say that the Stroke Comeback Center now answers that question, now what do we do? It just pointed out to me the need for this kind of long-term support and services for these families that are by no means done making progress just because their insurance has capped out.
So talk a little bit about who stroke victims are, because I think in our minds we think we know who stroke victims are, but there's a lot of reasons that people have a stroke.
Correct. And let me say first that the stroke survivors prefer to be called survivors, not victims.
Okay.
Because victim connotates a whole other thing. They're survivors and they're ready to live their lives. So, you know, your brain is multi-complex and multifaceted, and a stroke, by definition, is an interruption in the blood supply to any part of the brain for a significant period of time, significant enough to cause permanent damage. And so it really depends upon where in the brain your stroke occurs, what your symptoms are. There's a saying, different strokes for different folks, and that's absolutely true. Everyone's brain is different, and so every stroke is different. If you want me to elaborate,
yes.
Your brain is divided into two hemispheres, and they serve pretty different functions, although for best functioning, the two hemispheres need to communicate. But you hear people talk about being right-brained or left-brained, and left brain is more logical and right brain is more creative. So the symptoms of your stroke follow which hemisphere of your brain your stroke occurred. Or a brain stem stroke, your brain stem controls all of your bodily functions. So brain stem strokes are pretty difficult. Your language is stored in the left side of your brain. So when you have a stroke on the left side of your brain, you're going to have difficulties with your speech and your language.
Right, and so getting those back is not an immediate thing. Again, some people might recover, depending on the severity of the stroke, more quickly than others, but the ongoing support is really, I'm assuming, what makes a successful recovery successful.
Correct, right. So we now know, again, I've been doing this for so long, that we used to think that your brain recovered, and then stopped recovering. And we now know that's absolutely false. Your brain will continue to recover through a process called neuroplasticity, which just means that the neurons are learning how to communicate with each other and reaching farther. Damaged neurons never are reborn, but other neurons take over those functions. So we now know that with proper support, you can continue to improve your functioning indefinitely, whether it's cognition, whether it's speech or language, or whether it's physical. It's just like other bodily kinds of functions. If you go to boot camp and you build yourself up physically and then don't do anything, you're not going to recover with that same recovery curve. So we now know that there's reason to stick with these families over the long haul and be sure that they're being guided in the right direction and being given the best services in order to live the best life, the fullest life that they possibly can.
So with the Stroke Comeback Center, you don't necessarily deal with all effects of strokes. What you're really kind of focused on is something called aphasia. And explain to everyone what that means.
Correct, aphasia, the word that no one seems to know.
I've never heard of it.
Right. So aphasia is the disorder of language, and that's the key word, language, that occurs when the language area of your brain has been affected. Not only by stroke, it could be a traumatic injury, it could be a tumor, or it could be a combat wound. We also serve combat wounded veterans who've had injuries in the language center of their brain. And so aphasia is this difficulty manipulating language. And language, if you think of language in terms of a foreign language, there are 4 components. You receive information by reading and by listening, and you give information by speaking and writing. And any one of those 4, and usually some combination of all 4, are affected in aphasia. With the qualifying statement, it does not affect your intelligence. It's only a language disorder. It's not a disorder of intellect.
That is interesting. So your brain functions as it always has. You can think very complex thoughts, but you may not be able to process them and articulate them in the way that you did before. But they're still trapped up there.
Exactly.
That must be incredibly frustrating.
So it's enormously frustrating that all the thoughts are there, and there's some very interesting research that is going on at Georgetown University that talks about inner aphasia and the ability of people with aphasia to actually say, yes, I know it all. I know exactly what I want to say. I just cannot gather up my thoughts and express them.
So how do you work? So I'm assuming that a lot of this is individualized therapy because everybody has a slightly different impairment, right? So do you come up with individualized plans? How does that work when you first meet with a...
Good question. So yes and no. Yes, it's very individualized. First, everyone who comes to us, we are completely outside third-party reimbursement. So everyone who comes to us has already gone through the system, if you will. They've been through inpatient or outpatient rehab, a course of rehab of some sort. And so they have some idea of their goals to begin with, and we pick up where that leaves off. But one differentiation between us and medically reimbursed therapy is people determine their own goals when they come to us.
Okay.
So rather than saying, I'm going to change your speech in this way, we ask the question, what is it that you can't do now that you want to be able to do 6 months from now? And it might be Skype with my grandchild in California. It might be have the courage to walk into Starbucks and order my coffee. It might be to do something that was related to their previous life, go back to their quilting circle or volunteer at their church. And from that goal, because all of our services are provided by professionals, we're able to look at, okay, what are the steps and what are the barriers that are standing between this person now and that person achieving that goal? Do they know how to work their iPad? Is it an issue of familiarizing them? Is it an issue of coming up with scripted questions that they could ask their grandchild. And then, is it a matter of, all iPads are set up for disability services, so you can set them up for captioning, you can set them up for voice control. So we look at each individual person and then figure out what are the barriers standing between them and their goal. Additionally, at least in Vienna, our flagship site is in Vienna, we offer 50-some groups a week around all aspects of communication. For people who only have a handful of words available to them, to people who are back to work part-time and just need to put some frosting on their cake. So when we first meet with someone, we not only find out their goals, we match them with which of our groups is going to best meet their goals.
So you kind of assess where they are so that
Correct.
you can group them accordingly.
Where they are, where they want to go. And then the beauty is, yes, it's individualized. Yes, everyone has a goal. But getting from here to there happens in a beautiful way when you're surrounded by peers who are going down that same road with you. Maybe they're a step ahead of you and they're encouraging you along. Maybe they're being critical of you and saying, come on, you could try a little harder, or I know you're having a bad day, pick yourself up and let's keep going. So at some point in that recovery curve, and I learned this when I did when I was for 7 years at George Washington University, we did some research on this. At some point in that recovery curve, working with a group of peers really helps you reach your goals better than the traditional one-on-one. So with those principles, the Stroke Comeback Center was founded. Let's do it in groups. If everyone around the table pays a small amount, we offer our services at way below market rate. And if you can't pay, I'm always raising money for scholarships.
Well, that is good to know. And
Yeah.
I'm a big believer, too, that the groups help people to find their community and puts them with people who
Correct.
understand and can support
Correct.
them. And we're going to talk more about that when we come back from this break. So please join us when we are talking with Darlene Williamson from the Comeback Stroke Center.
I surrender, I surrender.
What's it feel like when a woman's having a heart attack? Chest pain, like there's a ton of weight on your chest. Severe shortness of breath. Unexplained nausea. Cold sweats. There's an unusual tiredness and fatigue. There's unfamiliar dizziness or lightheadedness. Unusual pain in your back, neck, jaw, one or both arms, even your upper stomach are signs you're having a heart attack. Don't make excuses. Make the call to 911 immediately. Learn more at womenshealth.gov/heartattack.
Good one, son.
Last summer, my new dad took me on vacation. First, we went deep sea fishing. Wow!
I'm so proud of you, son.
And then we went on Thunder Shark. That was awesome! Let's go again. 3 times. I gotta say, it was pretty cool.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination.
Honey, have you seen my cell phone?
But don't just imagine.
My park came to life?
Ooh, a plot twist.
Use STEM to build, create,
She did it.
and change the world.
Who's with me?
I'm more of a 2 feet on the ground kind of guy.
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today I'm talking with Darlene Williamson. She is the founder and executive director of the Stroke Comeback Center. Thank you so much for being here and kind of enlightening all of us about something that I had no idea about, and that is how you help people recover after they've experienced a stroke outside of the medical insurance world.
Correct.
So you've got a location in Vienna, the flagship. You've got one in Rockville. How do people find you, or how do you find the people?
Well, remember when you asked my story about where this concept came from, and I said, every family says, now what? Well, since we are the now what, all of my colleagues at the outpatient rehab centers, acute care hospitals, all the medical facilities in the DC area know about us. And now when families say, well, now what? They hand them a card from the Stroke Comeback Center and say, call these folks, they will meet with you and they will follow you over the long haul.
So is that how you decided to put your location in Rockville? You know, how are you growing your centers?
Correct, yeah. So we actually started in Oakton, about 3 miles down the road from Vienna, with a goal to grow that center in 5 years. And it grew to max capacity in 2.5 years. So I knew that I had a good concept here. We looked for new space in Vienna, and lo and behold, we filled up our space in Vienna. So what were our choices? Find a new home that was bigger, but we did not want to do that because, as you referenced, we've built a community. And if that community gets too big, then we can't provide the same personalized service. So the obvious choice was, let's transport our services across the Potomac River and find a place in Maryland, and we found a home in Rockville.
And that's slightly larger.
It is. It's 1/3 again bigger, and allows us to expand our services beyond language services and offer a whole new line of cognitive services.
Ooh, explain what the difference is between them.
So I talked about aphasia being the disorder of language with no interruption in your cognition. But there are strokes that do affect your cognition. Memory, time management, planning, initiation, basic life skills.
Like executive function.
Executive functioning, exactly. And so we get requests for that. We really wanted to be able to serve that population. We have a small program that does that in Vienna, but we wanted to be able to build a full comprehensive program, and we're on that path in Rockville.
So how soon after you reached capacity at Vienna did you open Rockville? I mean,
oh yeah, good. So it took about 2 years.
Right.
We were reaching capacity and putting people on a waiting list and crowding people in. I say, like, we gathered up like penguins on a frozen block of ice. We really needed to do something. And it takes a while to find the appropriate space and the funding to be able to support a second center.
Right. So speaking of funding and expansion, so how do you decide the next location, and what has to be in place for you to decide that we can feasibly put a new center someplace?
We exist on the backs, primarily on the backs of many individual donors, most of whom have experienced stroke. 1 in every 250 people are going to have aphasia. That's way more than some of the other disorders. And so that, in combination with grants and events that we put on, fund us. So we have to, I'm governed by a board of directors, and my board of directors has to look at the big picture and decide if we think we're willing to take that risk. And it's a leap of faith to open a second center. I want to be sure I mention while I'm here, however, that the Northern Virginia Community Foundation for Loudoun and Northern Fauquier County has selected us as a partner.
Wow.
And they are providing us with some space to begin services in Leesburg. at the Cornwall Hospital there, starting in about a month, I hope.
A month?
Yeah.
That was fast.
Yes. So it's been on my radar screen, but we've been talking to people and finally had this situation arise, and we're ready to go. So we're going to try this project for the remainder of the year, see how it goes and grows, and then decide what we're doing 6 months from now in terms of making our services out there permanent.
So I sit on nonprofit boards, so I know how this goes.
Yeah.
And it's nice when you have a partner who comes along, whether it's the community foundation or United Way or somebody who says, we've got money to do a thing and we're looking for a partner.
Correct.
I mean, that's a beautiful, beautiful place to be and say, well, we can do that.
Yep.
So talk about the financial structure. So people come to you because their insurance runs out and we're the what's next. Mm-hmm. But how do people fund it? I mean, I'm sure there are people who can afford and people who cannot afford these services.
So we do have fees and we have costs for our classes. But again, if you know, stroke is devastating financially.
Right.
Whether you're the primary breadwinner or whether you have to cut back on your work because you're supporting the primary breadwinner. So our fees are well below market rate. Even so, if that's burdensome, we have a sliding scale and we put you on scholarship money, and about a third of our participants get some financial help from us.
Which means you have to find people to make up the difference.
Correct, and it means my job is a constant fundraising job now, yeah.
But you know, and so I will say this about your educational, when you came to my Rotary Club and basically told us what you did and how you did it and why this came to be, and quite frankly, the enormous unmet need, which is why your centers are filling up so quickly. Part of raising funds is the education piece. Like people,
You're right.
You know, you go and say, I want you to fund the center, but people truly have to understand how great the need is, what the hurdles and challenges are, how many people need to get back to the full potential of their lives, and that this is a great way to invest funds, whether you're a grant maker or an individual donor. We need to get more people back to where they can live to the full capacity.
So let me be sure I say that we are the only community-based nonprofit organization that does this in the whole DC metro area, really only a handful in the whole country. And yet there are over 2 million people in this country living with aphasia. Where do they go for services? Which is, you know, a dream of mine, to be sure.
So assuming, well, I know that you've already shown that the model is quite effective, and you've actually had the Community Foundation come to you and say, we have an idea. So do you foresee, as far as your future growth, working with other locales outside this area who have maybe the resources or a space, and what they really need is somebody to help them set it up?
One step at a time. I'm hoping that could happen for sure. But what I really have on my radar screen is a virtual center so that we can do telerehabilitation.
Wow.
So that people in Southwest Virginia and other places that don't have access to something like this can log in at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning and join their peers in a book club or a caregiver group or conversation group or whatever their needs are. So,
that is fantastic.
Yeah.
What would it take for you to do that? Like equipment? I mean, if we had a magic wand and you could say, this is what I would need in order to do this amazing thing with this enormous reach.
Not that much financial support. I really just need to support my professionals to do this. Pay their costs to provide these services. So it's very doable and it's very reachable.
You know, I just had never thought of this. People talk about telemedicine, teleradiology, all kinds. In fact, mental health services now are starting to explore because there's so many rural places, particularly in Virginia, where you just don't have professionals there. So the idea of doing therapy using this platform is, well, why shouldn't we? I just never thought of it before.
Right. So I think it's a big wave of the future, but the future is not that far away for us. So I'm really hoping that we can start that by the end of this calendar year.
Well, this is amazing. So if people want to find out more and if they want to help support you and if they want to have a lot of fun, you have an event coming up.
We do.
It's on March 25th?
8th.
28th.
March 28th at the Columbia Country Club. We're holding it in Maryland to attract a new audience in Maryland called The Benefit of Chocolate. And we're going to have all kinds of delectable chocolates and, of course, heavy hors d'oeuvres to feed
Offset
people
the chocolate.
and some drinks and libations. Some fun. We're having teams from various hospitals compete in a chocolate contest and learn more about the center and just have a good evening of finding out what it means to be successful in this world following stroke.
And I think that is such a worthy goal because all of us who think we are invincible and go through life thinking we're invincible, stroke is not just for elderly people. Stroke can actually strike at any time.
Correct.
And you've made a good point about those who suffer from other kinds of brain injuries like veterans that you're serving. May not have been your original intention, but there you are because they suffer from aphasia. So, you know, I think it's been remarkable to have you here to help us understand who you're serving and how you're serving. And the fact that I had no idea that really you're the only game in town that does it this way.
Yeah. That's good news, bad news. It's people often say, who's your competition? I don't have true competition, but I wish that there were stroke comeback centers everywhere.
Because there's so much need
Correct.
for them. And you make a good point about how health insurance kind of dictates what any of us get as far
Correct.
as care.
And if we have time, do we have a minute?
We have 30 seconds. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I want to be sure everyone knows that we provide fitness services also.
Perfect.
And we're partnering in Loudon with a place to be music so we can provide the benefits of music therapy. So,
That's remarkable.
you know, the future's unlimited.
It certainly is. And I just want to say thank you so much, Darlene, for being here.
My pleasure.
What you're doing is amazing. And I hope that everybody at home who's listened to what she has to say understands the benefit to our greater community to offer these services. And she is a nonprofit, and so we all need to remember that our time, talent, treasure, and resources need to go to places like the Stroke Comeback Center. And this is what you need to know.